Julian Baggini's The Ego Trick is an exploration of the concept of self, identity, and what it really means to be a person. He begins by tackling a central puzzle. We often talk about ourselves as if we have a solid, unchanging identity, but when we look closer, that sense of continuity is difficult to define. Baggini argues that the self isn't a fixed thing that exists independently of our experiences, memories, and behaviors. Instead, it's more like a process or a pattern, something that emerges from the interplay of mind, body, and world. The book doesn't try to deny the reality of the self entirely. Baggini avoids extreme philosophical positions that suggest the self is an illusion. Instead, he offers a nuanced view, suggesting that while there isn't a core ego in the traditional sense, the idea of self is still meaningful and necessary for human life. This balancing act is what he calls the ego trick, the mind's ability to create a sense of self that feels real, stable, and singular, even though it's actually constructed from many changing parts. Throughout the book, Baggini draws on psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and even personal stories to illustrate his points. He examines how memory shapes our identity, noting that we often rewrite our pasts to fit our current understanding of ourselves. He also looks at how the brain constructs a sense of agency and unity, despite being composed of various subsystems that sometimes work independently or even in conflict. Baggini explores how culture and language contribute to our self-conception. The way we speak about ourselves and others influences how we perceive identity. He contrasts Western notions of individualism with more collectivist ideas found in Eastern traditions. This comparison opens up the possibility that our concept of self is not universal but shaped by social and historical factors. One of the key themes is how personal identity relates to moral responsibility. If the self is fluid or fragmented, what does that mean for guilt, accountability, or promises? Baggini argues that even though the self isn't a fixed essence, it is still coherent enough over time to make responsibility and ethical behavior possible. He emphasizes that recognizing the constructed nature of the self can actually enhance our moral clarity, not undermine it. He also dives into the implications of technological and medical changes, such as dementia and brain injury, on the self. These cases challenge our assumptions about who someone really is. Baggini shows how even in these extreme scenarios, traces of identity remain and matter deeply to loved ones, which complicates simplistic definitions of the self. Baggini uses thought experiments to challenge our intuitions. One such example involves teleportation. If a perfect copy of you were made on another planet, would that be you? These dilemmas force readers to consider what it really is that makes you, you. Is it your body, your memories, your personality, or something else entirely? Rather than offering one definitive answer, Baggini guides the reader through multiple perspectives. He examines Buddhist ideas that deny a permanent self, as well as Cartesian notions of a thinking I. His ultimate conclusion is that while no one perspective can capture the whole truth, the best understanding acknowledges both the reality and the constructedness of the self. The book also emphasizes how important the sense of self is to our lived experience. Even if it's a trick, it's a very convincing one, and one we need in order to function. Without the ego trick, our sense of continuity, memory, and agency would collapse, making life almost impossible to navigate. Baggini critiques both the overly rigid notion of a fixed soul and the radical claim that we are nothing but fleeting sensations. He walks a middle path, showing how the self is a useful fiction, real enough to matter, but not so real that it can't be questioned or reimagined. He addresses concerns that losing belief in a solid self could lead to nihilism or despair. Instead, he suggests that embracing the truth about the ego trick can be liberating. It can help us take life a little less personally, let go of destructive self-concepts, and live more flexibly and compassionately. In personal moments, Baggini reflects on his own life and the people around him, illustrating how these abstract ideas play out in relationships and everyday struggles. He shows how understanding the ego trick can soften conflicts, ease suffering, and bring clarity to the human condition. The book doesn't propose a program for self-improvement, but its insights can be transformative. By examining the machinery behind the curtain of the self, readers can become less entangled in ego-driven behavior and more open to change, growth, and connection. Baggini avoids jargon and writes in a clear, often humorous tone. This makes complex ideas accessible to general readers without sacrificing depth. He invites readers into a conversation, not a lecture, encouraging them to question their assumptions rather than accept dogma. Ultimately, the ego trick is a call for intellectual humility and curiosity. It doesn't ask you to abandon the idea of self, but to understand it more deeply, and perhaps more kindly. The self is not a fraud, but a story, and like all good stories, it evolves over time. By the end, readers are left with a flexible, thoughtful framework for thinking about who they are. The ego may be a trick, but it's one that serves a purpose. Understanding it doesn't make us less human, it makes us more so.